Welcome to the CPM Customer Success podcast, where we help Office of Finance leaders enable an exact solution to enhance their corporate performance without spending countless nights and weekends in the office. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Smetana from Nova Advisory. Nova Advisory is a 100% OneStream professional services diamond implementation partner. We help OneStream customers and prospective OneStream customers get the most out of their OneStream investments. For CPM Customer Success listeners, we now have a CPM Customer Success newsletter to keep you informed in this latest CPM Customer Success news. By subscribing today, we'll keep you informed on episode releases, including CPM Customer Success stories, CPM industry news, OneStream interviews, and CPM capabilities to keep you up to date on OneStream's unified platform for finance. So you can check that out now at Nova Advisory's website, novaadvisory.com/podcast, and subscribe to the CPM Customer Success podcast newsletter today. So in today's episode, we have Dave Collins, returning guest. Dave is the Director of Solutions Consulting and Strategic Alliances at OneStream Software. Back in episode 4 of CPM Customer Success, Dave and I discussed the CPM industry landscape and why businesses are moving to OneStream's unified CPM platform. So you can check out episode 4. It's a great baseline for what we'll be covering today and in future episodes, an industry comparison of CPM products. In today's focus, we have OneStream versus Anaplan. This is a great interview in which you'll come away with the evolution of Anaplan, how its connected module-based approach compared to OneStream's unified platform, and how OneStream addresses financial and enterprise planning challenges against Anaplan's approach. You'll gain insights into technical and strategic differences between Anaplan and OneStream, covering scalability, integrations, IT complexity, and business impact. And you'll hear real-world examples of organizations transitioning from Anaplan to OneStream, including industry-specific use cases, drivers for change, and how future trends in the CPM marketplace have influenced organizations' decisions to move to OneStream. So without further ado, let's get started with Dave. On today's episode of CPM Customer Success, we have a repeat and return favorite guest of mine, Dave Collins from OneStream Software. Welcome back to the show, Dave.
Thank you. Happy to be here. I think this is number 3, number 4, number 5, something like that. I've lost count.
I enjoy all of them. So whatever number it is, we'll go back and refer in the show notes so folks can listen in on the prior episodes. We've talked about the EPM CPM marketplace, and we've done a couple other OneStream competitive landscape episodes. And this one's focused on OneStream versus Anaplan. So Anaplan it's a solution, it's a CPM solution out in the marketplace that we sometimes see on Nova Advisory customers looking at when they're looking at CPM solutions. And today's episode, we're going to talk to Dave about how OneStream is different from Anaplan, why an organization might choose a OneStream over Anaplan, what those considerations are. So Dave, Anaplan, they've set themselves up and positioned themselves in the market as a planning solution. And I'd be curious to get your background and overview of its origins so you can set the stage for our listeners.
Sure. So yeah, it's definitely a technology that is focused on planning, hence the name Anaplan. They have acquired another organization, or I think their PE firm, Thoma Bravo, acquired another company called Fluence, which does more of the close consolidation side, or arguably consolidation only. Close being the things like account reconciliations, transaction matching, part of performance management. So they're focused largely on what they refer to as connected planning. And it's a bit of an interesting turn of phrase, because you actually have to connect several different Anaplan objects together. We can get into that in more detail upcoming. Largely, it's a cubing structure. They have some different naming conventions for cubes. And I'm a cube guy from way back. I did Essbase at Hyperion. I co-authored a book on Essbase. So I love cubes. Challenge with cubes, though, is that they don't have tables. And sometimes you just need a list of things. And sometimes you need something more than a cell a la what you would have in an Excel spreadsheet, which if you think of an Excel spreadsheet, that's essentially a three-dimensional cube. You've got rows, columns, and tabs. With Anaplan, you can create additional dimensions that'll create additional metadata references to that data value.
Okay. And so that kind of cube approach, maybe you can start to get into that approach and how OneStream approaches things differently. And what's the philosophical differences maybe OneStream's founders had when they designed it? And so basically from a philosophy and design, how does OneStream different from Anaplan?
Great question. So OneStream, as we've talked about on prior sessions, OneStream started with a platform basis. And really what that boils down to is our ability to now do what marketing refers to as unification. So what is unification? Most, if not all, of the other performance management vendors out there have different modules they will sell you, or like Anaplan, you'll have different cubes that you'll have to manage. And one of the things that we know from various pieces of literature, studies, if you will, as to what CIOs and CFOs and others in the C-suite are trying to eliminate, it's technical debt. So what is technical debt? Technical debt is what I need to create or purchase to make something work. So for example, a car, if I have a gas-powered vehicle, or as they would say in EMEA, a petrol-powered vehicle, I have to buy gas or petrol, and that there's technical debt associated with it. It is something I have to purchase to make the thing work, or I have to take it in periodically for maintenance, oil change, and so forth. If it's an EV, I have the cost of the electricity, which may or may not be less depending upon where you live, but it's the car itself won't do anything if you don't invest in the fuel. And so when you think of a modular based approach, where I have my actuals in one system, I have my plan or budget or forecast in a different system, I have my transactions in yet a different system, perhaps my operational analytic information in a fourth or fifth or 25th solution, I have to move that data around and make sure that it's synchronized so that I get the same answer no matter where I'm asking the question. And the technical debt is the need to actually spend time moving that data around and perhaps buying an ETL tool so that I can create something that'll move that data for me. So OneStream has been about bringing the data to it. It's not several different it's. The platform itself and the way we design OneStream, I can have tabular or relational data, I can have columnar-based relational data, I can have cube-based data, and it's all sitting in one application. And we did that very purposely so that we didn't have technical debt, because as we walked into this journey of creating OneStream 15 years ago, we were trying not to do what everybody else was doing. We were trying to solve problems that we saw from the various points of view that we had prior to that. Whether we were at Hyperion or Oracle or IBM or SAP, we brought a whole collection of people together that tried to progress the notion of performance management. So the principal difference between us and Anaplan is the same difference between us and just about anybody else. It's that unification. More to the point is that Anaplan is about planning, if you exclude the recent acquisition of Fluence, which allows you to get more toward the actual side. Now, arguably, I can do actuals in something like Anaplan, but I don't have the capability from a calculation perspective necessarily to do all the financial sorts of things.
Okay, perfect. So you've already touched on a couple items. My next question is really the challenges that as finance and IT leaders really assess the marketplace, or they ask their teams to do deep dives. I'm curious about the typical challenges they bump up into when they look at Anaplan versus OneStream. You've touched on the ETL piece and you've touched on the multiple cubes. Maybe you could put a wrap around that and talk about what some of those typical challenges are.
Sure. So if you look at the Office of Finance run by the CFO, you have 3 or 4 different major areas of focus. I have The actual side, close consolidation, typically regulatory reporting. I've got the FP&A side, and then I might have treasury. I might have some operations for special projects, perhaps operational analytics. It's typically those four, no matter what industry you're talking about. That would be that top layer just below the CFO. And so Anaplan plan is good for FP&A activities. It might also be good for some of the operational analytics activities if I want to dimensionalize the data, but it doesn't meet the needs of treasury necessarily, unless it's something analytic, or close consolidation, the regulatory reporting, unless you've purchased Fluent. So the big challenge with having Anaplan versus OneStream can come in and be the one thing for everything in the Office of Finance, and now with some partners that have developed other solutions that are outside of the Office of Finance, given our platform nature, could meet the needs of others within the organization. But it's an incomplete solution. It's a planning-based solution as opposed to a performance management-based solution. I think that's the real key thing, is that when I have come across Anaplan as a consultant before joining OneStream, if we were looking to close the books and do FP&A, Anaplan would not be a complete solution. It would be the thing that I could use to do FP&A and perhaps something to do some analytics on the actuals, on the close process, but it can't be the close process itself because it doesn't think that way. It's a math engine. It's really not a lot different than an Excel spreadsheet where I can have cells of data. There's a limitation to that too, by the way. I can have cells that are derived, calculated, or input, but I can't do without building it, I can't do the types of things that I typically have to do in a closed consolidation world. So just to put a bow on it, Anaplan, good solution for planning, typically a good solution in the mid-market size organizations because of the number of cubes that I may need for a larger organization due to the limitations of the size of the cube that you can have.
Okay, gotcha. I definitely want to spend some more time on the connectivity of those models.
Okay.
But before I do that, one of the things we've bumped up against is we've actually seen a couple of Anaplan conversions to OneStream. And some of the rationale we hear for why organizations make that switch is really limitations that they're experiencing in their planning function when they start to scale. And so it's truly kind of global enterprises scale up, they expand their models. They found Anaplan had some limitations. So could you talk to that point and how OneStream's approach for enterprise, I guess, scale is different?
Sure. So if you think of, I've used the term cube a lot, what they call cubes are modules. And so a module itself is a dimensional representation of data. And so if we think about that for a minute, if I were to give you a number like 1 million and I asked you what it was, you'd probably ask me more questions like, is it dollars? Is it revenue? Is it actual revenue? Is it actual revenue for a given region, for the entire company? So until you can actually define or explain the metadata for that number, you don't understand the dimensions of that number. And so as you think about solving a problem or doing a plan, which Anaplan is quite good at, I'm going to have a plan by entity, by product, by customer, by metric, revenue versus expense, probably in more detail than that, by month, probably not by day, but maybe by month or by week or by quarter or some time element. I'm going to have the actual, I'm going to have the plan, the budget, the forecast. I might have several different scenarios that I can do comparisons against, because as the actuals come in, I want to see how well I planned. And so as you look at that dimensional aspect of it, you're defining a cell, which then can hold that $1 million or that 1 million that I talked about before. Within Anaplan, I have modules, which are cubes. Cubes, by the way, have a limitation of 93 million cells. I've thought about 93 million for a couple times. On average, I think we're 93 million miles from the sun. And so that kind of sticks in my head. The inner geek comes out occasionally. But if you think about the 93 million cells is derived based upon the number of accounts, the number of time periods, the number of scenarios, the number of products, the number of markets, the number of this, the number of that, the number of the other thing, and it's all based on combinations. Think of, again, that Excel spreadsheet. where I have some number of columns, some number of rows, some number of tabs. And if I take the sum number and I just multiply them, then I know how many cells I have. So 93 million is not a lot when you think about it, because if I have 1,000 accounts by 12,000 time periods, or by 12 time periods, that's going to give me 12,000. If I then have 4 different scenarios, now I've got 4 times 12,000 or 48,000. If I have 1,000 entities, it's now 1,000 times that. And so it's 1,000 times 4 times 12 times this times that. You run out of space very quickly, or you run out of that 93 million cell real estate. So what they then do is allow you to create what's called a model, which can be a collection of modules or cubes. So now I have that technical debt issue starting to come into play. I've got these cubes over here for these products or these customers or these markets, and these other cubes over here for these products or these customers or these markets. I have to come up with a way of engineering so that I don't run out of room in that particular module structure. So it becomes this engineering exercise. And though I enjoy it, that's my background, what was refreshing to me about OneStream was I just have lists of things. I have my entities, I have my accounts, I have my time periods, I have my scenarios. I have all the dimensions that are there, and OneStream takes on the burden of dealing with how that information is going to be stored. There's some rules to it, certainly, but it takes on the burden so that I don't have to worry about, oh, I'm going to run out of space. We have customers that are actually dealing with, on the retail side, some very large data sets that are at the category or just above the SKU level, which is quite interesting from an operational analytics perspective, or perhaps looking at that trend over time and bringing in some external information so that I can do a data science exercise leveraging our Sensible AI forecast capability, which is embedded directly inside of OneStream. So I have everything in this big bucket, if you will, all of my data, all of my metadata, all of my function, all of my capability. It's all there. It eliminates all that technical debt that we talked about, all of the building around and connecting of the various things that are available to me. Simplification comes from that unification.
Okay. And as we think about Anaplan's approach, what I'm hearing is they've got a cube-based kind of model, I think, structure, as you described, which handle the different aspects of planning that they're taking on within the organization.
Right.
So OneStream's approach is a unified platform approach, and those are very different. So maybe you could compare what are some of the risks you would see trying to deploy Anaplan's connected models versus OneStream's unified approach?
Sure. So a couple of risks. Number one, if I wanted to do a plan around people, a dimensional model doesn't lend itself to that. Why? Because it's more list oriented. I'm going to have a list of people with their attributes. That doesn't dimensionalize well. So what's an example of that? I might have the names of the people, the positions of the people, the organization that they work in, and whether or not they have been on board for a length of time, whatever other attributes might be relevant to planning people, typically are going to be in a list. And then at some point, I'm going to take that data, and over time, I'll take subsets of that. For example, if you were to start next month and I've been around for 5 months, I'm going to have 5 months of expense. Your expense is going to come on board next month when you come on board. So OneStream will actually translate automatically for us based upon that list of effectively metadata. So metadata for each of the people, it'll translate and calculate what the expense happens to be on a person-by-person basis. And it does that in an automated fashion. If I were to try to do that same exercise in Anaplan, since I can't have a list of things and I can't have the attributes on a by-person basis, I'd have to go build a table someplace, maybe in SQL Server or in Oracle or DB2 if that's still around. I'd have to create a table someplace. I'd have to then create the connection between my module, which is the cube, and my table, and I'd have to define the logic between that. Whereas with OneStream, we actually have a people planning solution that I can download from Solution Exchange, plug into the application, and the configuration is just a matter of you telling us what attributes you need on a by person basis, and also the connection to perhaps the expense side of your P&L, because that's where people expense are going to start to come into play. And I don't have to go buy an ETL tool. I don't have to go buy a SQL-based something so I can store that data. I have everything that I need. The technical debt has been eliminated.
Perfect. So another difference that we come across is integration approach. So as OneStream approaches things from that unified platform, they've got a specific integration approach to pull in financial and operational data across the enterprise. That's been a challenge historically pre-OneStream. How is OneStream's approach different from Anaplan in terms of those integrations and pulling in those different data sets?
Good question. So historically, Anaplan has not had an onboard integration capability. They've recently released one. I don't know a lot about it. Prior to that release, it was all about using something like a Dell Boomi, which is an acquisition tool. It allows me to extract the data from a source system, transform it perhaps. Transformation could be something like the naming convention in these 3 different systems are different, and I need it to all be the same before I bring it into my cube structure. Our approach is effectively a blend of ETL, where I'm acquiring data from a backend source, and we're going to leverage something we refer to as the Smart Integration Connector that allows us to eliminate the need to directly connect using a VPN connection, a user ID and a password. That's actually helped our customers be a lot more comfortable in that they don't have that very important ID and password sitting someplace or being used by a function that has therefore access or capability to access everything. That's a massive risk. So we take care of the acquisition of that data leveraging the Microsoft Azure platform. We're a partner with Microsoft in that regard, and OneStream is built on Microsoft Azure. That capability uses something in Azure called Azure Relay, which is something IT shops typically like a lot. So it's there, it's ready to go. You don't have to go and acquire anything. But what we do then is provide an ability to ensure that the data is sensible, correct. For example, if I'm pulling data from the subledger in my ERP and the general ledger in my ERP, it stands to reason that the relationship in the ERP of subledger to general ledger should be sound, so that if I had expenses in the various subledgers and they all added up or should aggregate to the general ledger, that I should get the right answer. And so the data quality side of our data ingest capability, data integration capability will help us to create logic. And when I say logic, it's not a matter of going and writing code, it's a matter of picking parameters, making sure that what's coming in from these subledgers actually adds up to what was found in the general ledger, making sure that headcount coming from whatever system, underlying system has people isn't negative, because you should have people as opposed to not having people. And even more important, leveraging capabilities from a financial intelligence perspective, so that when the balance sheet data comes in, does the balance sheet actually balance before we get started on that particular process? All of that is built into OneStream, and where we're headed with our sensible AI capabilities is we will provide matching, fuzzy matching ability, so I don't have to go build a match set out necessarily. It'll propose match sets for me. A match set would be something along the lines of 3 source systems all have a revenue account, but the name is different in each of them. AI can actually help us to understand that these are the same revenue accounts across the 3 different subsystems, and we should match those 3 to this one. That kind of capability is going to be tremendously efficient. It'll reduce the workload on someone that would actually have to go off and build out that match set. Acquiring transactions so we can do transaction matching, the same thing, where I'm actually doing a matching exercise on that data and proposing those matches to a business user who says, yes, it is, or no, it isn't, and then off it goes. Reducing the amount of workload, increasing the amount of efficiency is incredibly important, and increasing that accuracy is has been incredibly important to us from the very beginning. So I guess in a nutshell, it's more than just go fetch the data, throw it into the application. It's before you put it in the application, does this data actually make sense? Is it correct? Or do we have to do something to it? And we can automate the doing something to it. Maybe create a journal entry because there's an offset that hasn't yet been accounted for in the underlying source system. We can establish thresholds to make sure that the data integration will take care of that for us. And most importantly, report it to us to let us know that it made a change to that data.
Awesome. I love that explanation of the data quality aspect and really talking about efficiency. I kind of want to stay on that efficiency topic because we consistently hear from finance leaders when they're looking at CPM solutions, they care about speed, they care about data accuracy, which you mentioned. They care about having the information so they can make better business decisions. So can you help us understand how OneStream enables better business decisions as compared to an approach or organization or solution like an Anaplan?
Sure. So if you think about that multi-cube based environment in Anaplan, where I have pockets of regional information or regional by product by customer information, or I have to break my account structure up and I have a separate physical set of objects that have to be updated, say on a monthly basis. New data comes in from the underlying ledger systems. I need to update actuals so I can do something as simple as actual versus budget, get the variance, do an analysis of that variance, and then create my forecast going forward. The challenge there is I have to bring the data in to the cubes. So I have to create a process of landing the data into each of the appropriate places. Whereas with OneStream, I just bring the data in and it's there. I don't have to direct it. I bring the data in. And if the data comes in and there's something in the underlying system like a new account or a new product or a new customer, we can actually take care of that real time, automate that process. And it would change the metadata, the underlying metadata in the application if that's appropriate to do. Whereas if you think about structuring multiple cubes where it's the same account structure in multiple cubes, and some of our now customers, former Anaplan customers, had hundreds to thousands of these cubes. And let's say a new account comes down the road. Well, I have to add that account to hundreds or thousands of cubes before I can bring the data in. Well, that's a problem. It's going to either prompt a failure, or I'm going to have to create a process by which I can go make updates to each of those physical cubes before I can bring the data in. So it's a multi-pass kind of a process that would have to be put in place. And the challenge there is, what if I'm knocking on the door of that threshold of how many cells I can have in a given module at any point in time? That may create a cascade of failure, whereas with OneStream, we don't have any of that. So from an efficiency standpoint, our customers are quite comfortable with the fact that we can bring data into the application. If there's new metadata and therefore new data associated with it, we can handle that. We can handle that seamlessly. We can report that information back immediately. I don't have to do any data movement and perhaps make sure that the data movement actually occurred. All of those things are going to take time. As an example, if my family, I have a relatively small family, 4 children in total, my wife and I, what if we all lived in separate houses, right? So separate cubes, separate houses. And when we need to get together, we need to make a phone call. We need to coordinate schedules, as opposed to, oh, we all live in the same house. We can get together for dinner tonight and actually have a conversation and have the back and forth that is necessary. So unifying the family into one house is actually quite comparable to breaking that family unit apart into separate physical homes, one per. I now have a lot of work to do just to connect those dots for a relatively small family. Imagine trying to do that when you have thousands of these physical cubes out there, where I have to ensure that the data from the underlying ERP, the source system, makes its way into each of those places flawlessly before I can do what I need to do. I have to wait, whereas with OneStream, I don't. Time is money. That lack of efficiency is going to create that burden of time is money.
Okay, perfect. So earlier I touched on one of the reasons we see customers moving from Anaplan to OneStream, scalability. You just touched on cubes. I love your multiple house analogy. Are there any other kind of typical characteristics that drive a company to switch from an Anaplan and transition into OneStream?
Yeah, we actually still have some customers that are using Anaplan, and they're using Anaplan in addition to OneStream. And what's interesting about that is they might have departmental usage where they ran out of room in a spreadsheet. And so they've continued to leverage Anaplan to create just a little thing over here in the corner. They haven't actually migrated those users to a OneStream as yet. That's okay. If that's working for them, that's okay. More times than not, they then have to migrate that data from those Anaplan solutions into OneStream. So what's the point of this? I may continue using Anaplan for some analytic need as a larger spreadsheet that is not a systematic approach to solving a problem. Cool. Essentially, that's what spreadsheets are all about. They're personal productivity tools that allow me to create an opinion or a pro forma example of the way I think data exists within my organization. I might use it just as a calculator. Use Anaplan for that, I get it. Most of our customers that have migrated from Anaplan to OneStream, I think would tell you that what they bought was not what they thought they bought. During the demonstration, they saw the ease of modeling, they saw the ease of use with Anaplan. Everything looked very much spreadsheet-like. But then when they actually started to make use of it and saw the engineering effort, there was a bit of an awakening when they realized that they couldn't do financially intelligent application development, which would help them to deal with regulatory reporting issues, statutory reporting issues. They got an awakening. There's a neighbor of mine actually that works for a non-customer of ours. And when I first joined OneStream almost 5 years ago, we were having a conversation over the fence as we were cutting lawns. I was cutting my lawn, he was cutting his lawn. And he was telling me about how they were looking at OneStream and they were also looking at this thing called Anaplan, and he was asking my opinion on that. And I tried to give him an opinion without steering him necessarily in a particular direction. I had a conversation with him last summer. They still haven't completed the implementation. And we're now 3.5, 4 years into this because they thought they were going to be able to do financial reporting, and they can't because they don't have in Anaplan a capability to understand credits versus debits. They don't have an ability for it to understand what's the analysis of variance for currency conversion. They don't have the ability to have a balance and a periodic. You have to create all of that. It's a platform, and they say they're a platform, but it's more of a platform in that you have to create things that are inherently embedded in our platform. We talk about OneStream being a platform analogous to an iPhone. And the analogy we tend to use, always use, something like location services. My phone knows where I am at any point in time. And it's because there's a thing on here called location services, which is in the hardware based on GPS, and it's also in the software. And that software, think of it as a subroutine, can be used by other vendors like Microsoft with Outlook or Google with Maps. And then the combination of that can be used to help me understand when I should leave to get to an appointment. Microsoft didn't have to build that. Google didn't have to build that. They simply tapped into what was in the platform. So there's out-of-the-box function in the iPhone, just like there's out-of-the-box function in OneStream. Whereas with Anaplan, I'd have to build that. And again, more technical debt, which I feel like I've used that phrase almost too many times. But it's worth pointing out that with Anaplan, you're going to have technical debt. And with Anaplan, you're going to do planning unless you also purchase their Fluence line, which allows you to get into statutory and regulatory reporting. And that two different sets of software that is going to provide more technical debt, because eventually I have to connect those two worlds.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. So I'm curious now if there's other specific use cases where OneStream really has an advantage over Anaplan, or maybe it's industries. What do you typically see when customers make that comparison and choose OneStream?
So the industry, I think, is the interesting place to look, right? So we have customers in virtually every industry that I'm aware of. In fact, we have in Salesforce a nice little visualization using, I forget the name of the code, but there's an official code for each industry, and it's all categorized by those official codes. So I can go in and click on a little bar in a bar chart or a sub bar in a bar chart to see which industries do we have customers, more customers, less customers. We definitely have a lot in manufacturing. Probably the lion's share of our customers are going to be in manufacturing, but we have a ton in retail. We have two of the top three retailers in the world. There's a really big retailer that everybody knows that is Fortune 1. They're a customer. We also have number 3 that competes with them in that buying lots of stuff category, where I go into more of a factory outlet kind of a store and I buy the big jar of pickles, or I buy lots and lots of toilet paper. So hint as to who those two customers happen to be. Operational use cases. Funny enough, when we talk about performance management, and you know that I don't like using CPM or BPM or EPM, because we have customers that don't like the C or the B or the E, because they don't consider themselves to be a corporate entity or a business or an enterprise. And so I dropped that letter off. I think we talked about that on a prior podcast. We have customers that are going down to the operational level of detail. There's a very large consulting firm that loads more than 10 million records every day, 10 million records of operational data that allows them to see how the projects are going at the customers. That's not typical performance management as Gartner defines it, or as IDC defines it, or Forrester defines it. They tend to think more in terms of that summary level with statutory regulatory reporting, so the actual side of the house, the plan, budget, forecast side of the house, maybe the close side, where I'm dealing with account reconciliations, transaction matching. That little triad, absent of the operational detail, is where most feel performance management sits. And in my view, performance management is whatever I need to manage the performance of my organization. So if I need a dashboard that shows me how the project is going, yeah, I could go buy another solution that has a dashboarding tool and an operational analytic tool. But if I can do that in OneStream and have one place to go for all things, why wouldn't I do that? So a tremendous advantage for us, whether you're looking at us compared to Anaplan or anybody else in the market, is that instead of going to buy another module or buy another vendor's module to do operational analytics, I can do operational analytics in OneStream. And not only can I do operational analytics, but I can then leverage that operational data for an FP&A exercise and do that intelligent forecasting that I talked about earlier. So for me, and I used to talk about this when I first joined, and this is an unofficial term, I've always seen OneStream as having an unbounded capability with regard to data. Now, there are boundaries to how much data I'm going to have. I'm not going to replace Snowflake and have every operational element that, say, a Snowflake would have. I'm not going to replace an ERP, but I can bring a lot of data into OneStream. I'm not in a fixed form 93 million cell module cube. I'm not forcing performance management as most see it, which is an end of month, end of quarter, end of year process, which is inherently summarized. I'm allowing organizations like Nova to work with your customers, our mutual customers, to solve problems. And that could be a problem that's this big, a problem that's this big, or you may start here and start to go out into the this big kind of a category. I think there's a tremendous amount of flexibility with the approach that we've taken that is inherently limited when you look at an Anaplan.
And one of the things you touched about or touched on is sensible AI, ML, sensible ML's the solution that OneStream offers. I'm curious about future trends in the market, where you see things heading. Anything additional you want to add related to sensible ML as you look at where OneStream and CPM is heading?
Sure. So this just in, it's not on the website yet, but we've changed the names.
Okay.
And I like this approach. Marketing has decided that we now have a Sensible AI trademark portfolio. And so
Okay.
within Sensible AI, there's Forecast Studio and Agents. And Forecast is what we used to refer to. It's the solution formerly named Sensible Machine Learning, similar to Prince when he had the character. So Sensible AI Forecast is a solution that it's a pre-built solution that you plug into the application that you're currently using for a forecast process, a plan process, your consolidation of actuals, your operational analytics. And what do you do with it? You plug that in so that it can look at all of that operational depth of data from your internal systems. It can then bring in external information like weather day by day, the feels like temperature, the actual temperature, what was humidity, was there a lot of precipitation, 25 different measures, if you will, for weather. It can bring in consumer price index, stock prices, COVID indice data, all sorts of external information, meaning external to what I'm storing in-house in the organization. My operational data, typically that coming out of the ERP, isn't necessarily going to have the weather report, nor is it going to have COVID data. It might, maybe it's in a data warehouse or something. So we'll reach out to trusted systems, pull that data in to explain the context of what happened on a given day. Wow, we sold a lot on that day. The weather was really nice. COVID didn't exist. Everybody was flush with cash. Interest rates were way down. All sorts of things that might correlate with that day that then can be used to predict going forward. That's all built into the OneStream platform. And the solution itself can be plugged into an application. That's a really cool thing. Anaplan has some capability in that regard, but it's a different module, leveraging Amazon Web Services, if I'm not mistaken. And so I have to do the data movement. I'm already in an environment where I have to do a lot of data movement amongst the cubes, perhaps data movement over to Fluence to do the statutory, regulatory, actual side of the process. Now I have to do more data movement to get to their solution around AI ML, whereas we're doing more of the same, more of unification, because we're trying to ease the burden on the business user.
Perfect. So as we start wrapping up, I'd like to summarize and provide some guidance to finance leaders looking at PM solutions.
It's okay.
Thanks for that. So what would you recommend they consider when they look at OneStream as compared to Anaplan?
That's a great question. So what to consider? Everybody has their own bias. We all live in our own little worlds. So if I'm in charge of FP&A and I love spreadsheets, I may be completely comfortable with Anaplan. Why? Because I'm sitting in FP&A. My life is all about planning. I don't care about regulatory reporting. Yeah, at some point I have to bring the actuals in at some level of detail so I can do a comparison in some way, shape, or form. I can make it work. I love tinkering, so engineering something is not that big a deal. But that's with my blinders on what I need. What I think needs to be done, what I would encourage prospective customers to do, is to think outside of the box that they currently live in. That can be challenging in this day and age. We have a lot of social media is feeding us what we are used to clicking on. So the algorithms are pushing us more and more toward what we're used to. So thinking outside of what we're used to can be somewhat challenging. What I would encourage somebody who's looking at Anaplan to do is have conversations elsewhere in the organization about what needs might exist, or elevate the discussion to the CFO who's watching over not just FP&A, but also close consolidation, operational analytics. The breadth of what is necessary in the office of the CFO may partially be suitable for an Anaplan with a good amount of work, as we talked about, with that technical debt that I mentioned several times. But that's not doing justice to what the overall organization requires. So I think what needs to happen is, since we're all about unifying multiple functions together, you need to think outside of your function. You need to think about the other functions that may or may not be supported by what it is I'm looking at. And again, what we're trying to do is be supportive of all functions, to unify all functions so that we can create as much efficiency and ease as we possibly can. So I think that's the key thing, is to think outside of what you currently do.
Perfect. Great summary. Curious, any final takeaways, final thoughts, any additional advice you might consider providing our listeners on why OneStream is the right choice for organizations looking to create that performance management solution?
Sure. I get asked this question a lot. And at the end of the day, when I do sessions for our partners doing compare contrast, and I do a lot of these sessions comparing and contrasting, I spend a lot of time, probably revealing too much about myself, just trolling around, reading, looking at reviews, actually going to an Anaplan website, reading through the documentation, reading the opinion pieces of the technology, whether it's Anaplan or anyone else that we compare to. And I like to think of it more as a comparison, not a competition. How they do something works. They have a lot of customers that have various levels of happiness in their deployments of the solution. They may not know any different outside of that particular world, similar to what I talked about before. Think outside of the box. Think about things that might be possible despite the fact that you don't have any personal experience with it. But at the end of the day, whether it's Anaplan or any of the other vendors out there, can I make it work? The answer is yes. You're going to make it work with a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, however. That was the big thing when OneStream, when our visionary founders got together and said, let's do performance management, because that's what we've been doing for other vendors. How should we do it? Should we get something out there straight away that looks like everything else and we can start making money, or should we try to do something different or some combination? And we decided to do something different that met the needs of the customers that we used to work with, but would progress and do it better. And so I know early on, before I joined OneStream, I remember hearing about this thing called OneStream, and I thought, that's not possible. It is. It wasn't possible to land a man on the moon, but we figured out how to do it. We had to create new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things, new technologies. OneStream actually has created some very clever ways to unify into a single application, eliminating the need to have multiple cubes. We inherently, without revealing too much and getting into too much under the hood detail, we actually have multiple cubes that get spawned by the system. The system takes care of it, though. I don't have to think through the engineering effort to compartmentalize at less than or equal to 93 million cells across potentially thousands of cubes. OneStream actually handles that burden for me. I've also been found saying there's stuff that the computer should do for you. As we're seeing, AI is a great example. You can go into Copilot and ask Copilot to go find something for you and distill it, and maybe even ask it to change its response into a poem of some sort. Computers can do a lot of really cool things along that automation line. And so as I see it, what we've done is tap into technologies that allow us to automate, to create ease of use, to create greater efficiency, as opposed to a lot of the other vendors that are out there that are doing more of the same, with some innovation, certainly, but it's more of the same. There's a lot of work associated with it. And can I actually solve the problem? Sure, but it might take this much versus this much. And I think there's a value to that.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap up, Dave. I really appreciate the time. Thanks for explaining to us the difference between OneStream and Anaplan, and we will catch you next time on another episode of CPM Customer Success. Thanks again.
You're welcome. Sounds great. Take care.
All right. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of CPM Customer Success. Reminder to check out the CPM Customer Success weekly email newsletter to stay informed on the latest CPM Customer Success episodes and OneStream news. You can go to the Nova Advisory website, novaadvisory.com/podcast, and subscribe to the CPM Customer Success podcast newsletter today. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week for another episode of CPM Customer Success.